I really hate to have to come on here and state the obvious, but there are a lot of coaching changes over the last week to 10 days or so as the regular season wraps up. We had a bunch of openings, college football openings happening earlier and earlier in the college football season these days. And a large part of that is because of the early signing day in December. So coaches want to make a change quicker rather than, or schools want to make a change quicker rather than later. But I was going to make some videos kind of as these coaching changes were announced last week. But we had football games to talk about last week and not a lot of football games to talk about this week. So I figured I would just hold off on some of these coaching videos till this week. So I'm going to do a series of my thoughts on some of these coaching hires that we've seen over the last week or so this week and get them uploaded. And we're going to start with this one. My buddies over at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is somewhere over in this pile here of teams that don't matter. And whose season is over. Now, Tech's season was over before it started, but here's what we're left with for this year. You already know. The reality with Georgia Tech, and I've had a couple of Georgia Tech fans argue this point with me, but you can't argue this point. It's widely reported. It's all over the place. ESPN, Yahoo Sports, wherever you want to look, wherever you get your college football news, you can find this information. It's not a government secret. Georgia Tech interviewed 12 people. 12. They all said no. Nobody wanted the job. Those that did want the job, Georgia Tech was not able to offer them enough money. And it had less to do with the amount of money Georgia Tech was willing to pay per year and more about the fact that Georgia Tech was not willing to guarantee all of that money. And that's what coaches want these days. And on one hand, I don't really blame the coaches. Schools are so quick to fire coaches now that coaches want some kind of guarantee before they take the job. And that's where these buyouts come from, right? A coach gets hired, he craps the bed for 3 or 4 seasons, the school wants to fire him. Well, he's got 5 years left on his contract at $6 million a year, that's $30 million. Well, if the contract is guaranteed through a buyout and you fire a coach, you still have to pay out the remainder of his contract. Georgia Tech wasn't in a position financially to be able to do that with their contracts. And that's why the handful of people who would have been willing to swallow their pride and actually take a job as Georgia football head coach had to say no. You got people like Jamie Chadwell over at Coastal Carolina who turned down Georgia Tech to take the job at Liberty. Is this true? Or anyway, or whatever. I mean, you had coaches, you had group of 5 coaches to coach at Tulane. What is going on? You've got group of 5 coaches saying no to a Power 5 school and then taking a different job within the group of 5. Like they would rather be in the group of 5 than to be associated at all with Georgia Tech. And people think I'm trolling, or it's hard for me to say anything about any of Georgia's rivals because people think I'm saying it just because they're Georgia's rival. That's fine if you want to think that, but I'm telling you, I live in the state of Georgia. The reality is about Georgia Tech football and really Georgia Tech athletics as a whole, because you can look anywhere. There is no bright spot right now for Georgia Tech athletics, and the reason is Georgia Tech as an institution, at least up until this point, has chosen not to put a lot of emphasis or care that much about athletics. Not that they never have. There's been times in the past where they have cared. Right now, they just don't care. And it's obvious. They are not all in, and we'll stick to just football. In this age of college football, whether you love it or hate it, the direction it's headed with NIL, transfer portal, kind of the players kind of having more of a say-so in how they're treated, how they're paid, where they play, when they play, those kinds of things. As a school, as an institution, not even just as forget the head coach. The head coach, the entire staff, the athletic director, the school president, the institution as a whole, when it comes to college football these days, all of that has got to be all in on football. Financially, emotionally, passionately, you have got to be all in for football, or you are going to find yourself in a position where you are winning 3 games a year, 3 years in a row, like Georgia Tech. It's not hard to look around the landscape of college football and point out schools that just don't have the same level of buy-in when it comes to football as other schools. Now, having a 100% mentality when it comes to football is not a guarantee that you'll have a successful team or a successful program, but it's mandatory to be all in if you ever want to have a successful team or a successful program. You can talk to Miami fans, who we love to kind of pick on Miami because they were really, really good. Now they're really, really bad. Miami fans will tell you one of the main reasons they have struggled over the last 15 years is because financially, the football program did not have the backing of the school, not like it needed to. The facilities were outdated. The recruiting budgets weren't where they needed to be. The staff budgets weren't where they needed to be. Now, Miami has changed and is in the process of trying to change a lot of those things now under Mario Cristobal. And this isn't me making fun of Miami. This is what I have heard from Miami fans, that financially they weren't where they needed to be. And that's a big reason why Miami has sort of struggled over the last 15 years. But it's not hard to look around college football. Like Vandy, for example. And I know, academic requirement. Okay, but forget the academic stuff at Vandy. Does it appear to you that Vandy is all in on football? Not really. And the record kind of reflects that. Again, I'm not saying that if Vandy suddenly had an unlimited supply of money and the administration and the school was all in on football and built a new stadium and new facilities and all that kind of thing, they'd immediately start winning 10 games. That's not what I'm saying. But I am telling you, unless that happens, then the other is never going to happen. That is what I'm telling you. And it's not hard to look around and see the schools that this applies to and the ones it doesn't. Does anybody doubt whether or not the University of Georgia as an institution is all in on football? Does anyone doubt that? What about Alabama? What about Ohio State? What about Michigan? What about Clemson? It's not hard. Now, Texas and Oklahoma, those are two schools that are all in on football, and they're struggling. So again, it's not a guarantee for success, but it's one of the prerequisites you have to be successful. It's just as important as having the right head coach, right? You can have all that support from the school and the institution. If you miss a bunch of times when it comes to head coaches, you're still going to struggle. See Tennessee for the last 15, 16, 17 years, up until this year where it appears they might have a coach who knows what they're doing. We'll see. Tennessee's all in on football. Hasn't prevented them from going, winning 4 and 5 games a year because they had terrible coaches. So being all in isn't a guarantee, but it's definitely a prerequisite to have a legitimately good football program. And again, a good football program is separate from a good football team. A good football team is judged on a year-to-year basis. A good football program is constantly good over a longer period of time, right? It's possible Georgia could go something like 8-4 next year. That would be a bad team. It wouldn't be an indication that Georgia had a bad program. Georgia's clearly got a good program. Same thing with your Alabama. Alabama went 10-2 this year. Clemson went 10-2. Those are bad teams relative to the expectations they've had, right? Those don't mean those are bad programs, though. I think you understand what I'm saying. So the thing with Georgia Tech is, did it matter who they hired? I don't think it did. I don't think it did because they don't have the buy-in from the school necessary to be a big-time player in today's big-time college football. They just don't have it. They may never have it again. A lot of people think that college football is headed towards some sort of NFL model where you have two quote-unquote super conferences, like the NFL has the AFC and the NFC, right? There's a lot of people that still think college football is headed that way. I don't know if it is or not. But if it is, there's not going to be 65 teams like there is now, or 68 actually with the addition of the other 3 to the Big 12. There's not going to be 65, 68, 70 quote-unquote Power 5 teams when we go that route. Some of these schools aren't going to be able to compete, and they're going to drop down. Georgia Tech is a prime example of possibly one of those schools. Until they make up their mind as an institution, they're going to take football serious. They're just never going to have a successful program. Is it possible through the transfer portal or some other means they luck out and have a good year here and there? Yeah, that's possible. It's possible they have an 8-9 win season, maybe even a 10-win season or whatever, but it's not going to be anything they're going to be able to maintain because they just don't have the support and the buy-in from the administration. So 10-12 coaches told them no. Most of them just straight up didn't want to work there. The ones that were even willing to consider working there, Georgia Tech wasn't able to offer them enough financial security in terms of money and guaranteed contracts, so they said no. Some of them even choosing to take a different job in the group of 5 rather than work at Georgia Tech in the Power 5. That's how bad it is there. So they're left with no choice, really, but to promote interim head coach Brent Key to head coach. What do I think about Brent Key? He took a really, really bad team and injected some life into it. There's no denying that. Georgia Tech has been circling the drain for 3 years under Jeff Collins. He was absolutely horrible. So is it possible that Brent Key is better than Jeff Collins? Of course it is. But, that's like, I'll make another video about Deion to Colorado. Colorado won 1 game this year. One. So what? They win 3 next year? Now you're going to tell me Deion's an amazing coach? And again, I'm not expressing an opinion on Deion in this video. I'm just saying, so Brent Key takes over a team that, can barely get out of their own way and manages to guide them to a 5-7 season, and all of a sudden he's the next coming. I'm not convinced. I don't think Brent Key is a very good coach. I can tell you right now, there wasn't a single other school in the country knocking on Brent Key's door inquiring about his services. So again, even if he were a great coach, would it matter at Georgia Tech? No. But Georgia Tech did not look at Brent Key and go, that's our guy. That's not what happened. This is very similar to how Tennessee ended up with Jeremy Pruitt. Tennessee interviewed 7, 8, 9 people, something like that. Almost all of them said no. Jeremy Pruitt was the only one willing to take the job. We see how that worked out. I'm not suggesting that's what Brent Key is about to do to Georgia Tech with the Chick-fil-A bags and cheating and buying players and all that. Georgia Tech can't afford to do that anyway. But in terms of results on the field, I expect something pretty similar. I don't think you're going to get very much out of Brent Key. Can he get Georgia Tech to the postseason at least? Make a bowl game? Yeah, that's possible. But again, getting to a bowl game in college football is not a difficult task. There are only a handful of teams in the country who celebrate 6-win seasons. You're talking about teams like Vandy and Kansas, and that's about it. And right now, Georgia Tech is in that category. So could Georgia Tech be throwing a parade this time next year because they go 6-6 or even 5-7? I'll get you into some bowls now. Is it possible we see a parade through downtown Atlanta this time next year because by some miracle Georgia Tech has become bowl eligible? Yeah, that's possible. Is it an indication that Brent Key is an amazing coach and Georgia Tech is about to become a top 25 program? No, it's not. I don't think this is going to work out in the long run for Brent Key. What he'll be there 3 or 4 years, probably just like Jeff Collins was. Or it could be that expectations dip so low at Georgia Tech, it doesn't matter how many games you lose, they'll just keep you anyway, so they don't have to go through the embarrassment of another coaching search where everybody that can fog a mirror tells them no. Have a great day.